This is the story of Martha. Indian society, we see that even educated, self-reliant, or uneducated women, they face a lot of atrocities. A lot of problems are hidden in our society, and our society fails to understand the need and encourage our women. We see that many women, whether they educated or not educated, they become like a plaything. When a man tries to this one, not able to be supported or encouraged, their need for love is being very shallow. There is a shallow love that is given by others. We see that when a man gets married and loses the wife, he can get married again. But in Indian society, where women cannot, no one gets married to a widow, and we see Indian women are abused, and they are mistreated, they are oppressed. We see a lot of things, but Jesus sees a woman differently. He respects and loves and understands her feelings, and Jesus would never have these inhuman kinds of baseless customs and traditions that condemns the women and show favoritism. And we see that this is a story of Martha. Martha was born in a middle class family, and her parents were there. Her father was a clerk, and they lived in an old house, with the grandfather and the grandmother. And Martha studied well, and she pursued her studies, and she was doing her studies. And we see that she was doing her BSc nursing, and she used to be a good student. Due to family pressure, her grandmother was about to die, so she wanted them to get married, and finally Martha agreed for the marriage. And then they showed the guy's photo. His name was Peter, and then he was well placed in a good company, and he was a handsome person, and he was earning well, and they had their own house, and Martha was very happy. Okay, fine. And she thought she would get married to this person. So she finished her graduation, and then she thought, okay, let her, according to family's pressure thing and other things to make her family happy, she got married, and she lived with her in-laws. It was a joint family, and then she wanted to do a bit of studies, and then they got married in the church. Martha came from a very different background, whereas Peter was like a different denomination of Christianity. And we see that Martha's parents, they got her married, and then her brother also informed about his love, and she was getting to know about her brother's love issue, and she tried to speak to her parents, but then they were not convinced, because the girl belonged to another caste or religion, so they were not very happy. But then the brother was very adamant and got married in a registered marriage, in a court marriage, and then Martha had to go and convince her parents, though they were not very fine. And then she started doing some practical studies, where she could improve her job and but by that time she could get a good promotion job and other things. Peter met with an accident, and her exams were ahead, and she was really working hard. But then it was such a bad news that her husband was critically injured, and they were not able to save him. And then her parents came down from the hospital, and then Finally, the family gathered, and then they conducted all the final rituals, and then it was like people were almost, telling that Martha was a cursed person, and because she had very bad luck and so many things. Then Martha was totally broken, and then she started to pursue her higher studies, and she wanted to divert her mind, and then she attended an interview, and she got a good job, and she was occupied. And then what happened was, some friend had visited the home, the brother-in-law's friend, and tried to misbehave with her, and she was not fine with that, and she kept the matter to herself. She didn't tell anybody. And then in the workplace she had some friends, and Susan was one of her friend. She was a Christian, and Martha felt very comfortable with her, because Susan always would comfort her and advise her and help her. And there was other friends, they were there. There's some non-Christian friends also were there, but Martha felt very comfortable with Susan, and Susan prayed for her every time she had a problem and she fell down. She comforted her and advised her. There was one more friend, Nalini. She was also a nice person, but then she was having an affair, and she was not so very comfortable with Martha. And then we see that how Martha was very excited to know about Susan, and Susan used to speak to her about God and so many things, and Martha went with her to pray, and people were praying, some sisters were praying, and then Susan took her to a place where the eunuchs were there, and they met them at the traffic signal, and they picked up a conversation, and then they gave them some money, and then they visited their place and helped them with whatever they needed. And then Martha was thinking about that Saroja whom she had met, that eunuch, and she was asking Susan about their address and all those things, and then both of them went and met these eunuchs place, the colony, and then they decided to start this eunuchs ministry and help these women so that they can come up in life and have a good future. And they tried to plan something, they prayed, and then finally they decided that they will teach them some practical skills. So what Martha did was, whatever salary she got, she invested in buying some machines, tailoring machines, and she also thought of teaching them tailoring so that they can live. And we see that Susan had a friend called Mark. So he was a businessman, and he used to come to the church meetings, and we see that Martha was introduced to Mark, and Mark was also a very generous and compassionate person, and he was also thinking of helping Martha and Susan in this eunuchs ministry. And we see that they decided to go and help these eunuchs, and the pastor used to preach how we have to live a godly life. And Martha was really convinced that Jesus is Lord, and she got baptized, and her parents were not happy with it because she came from a Catholic denomination. So somehow she convinced them, and then they agreed, and then they started the tailoring program for the eunuchs and helped them to learn the tailoring. And then by the time we see that Mark also started to like Martha, and he was a very prayerful man. He was praying about his marriage actually, but he didn't know whom to get married to, and he was kind of mentioning to Susan. And we see that Martha was not thinking about it, but Mark was quite happy to see Martha's attitude, her compassion, her caring attitude towards the eunuchs, and she was very dedicated. Though she was a widow, yet she was very good. So Mark always used to pray for a godly woman in his life, and he could see all those qualities that he wanted in Martha. But he never thought of speaking to Martha. But then he mentioned to Susan, and Susan was trying to speak to Mark, and said that she would arrange a time where first she would speak to Martha and arrange a time where they could speak together, and then it was like just happening where Susan was a married woman actually, so she had her own family. And Alani, actually, who was one of Martha's colleague and Susan's colleague, she was a widow, but she had an affair and she had some kids, so she had her own problems. So we see that the affair Nalini had was a married man. So Martha and Susan always advised her to be careful and not have anything to do and spoil her children's future with such people. And since she had a job, she can support her family and just be away from such people. But she never listened. Nalini would want to live her life as she pleased, so they left her alone. And then we see that Mark and Susan were speaking about Martha, how they could talk to her, approach her regarding the marriage thing, marriage issue, because Mark was quite interested in Martha. So we see that by the time eunuch's ministry had started, and Sarocha, who was the eunuch's ministry, she was quite interested with Jesus, and she got baptized.